Hello and welcome to the MilVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson and Tim Shaw. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. Most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that every veteran deserves a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, earn, and build a world-class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. Our primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode. Today, I'm joined by Matt Bowman. Matt is the CEO of Autobiographer, which is a venture-backed AI company that we're going to dive into on the show today. We also had a chance to work with Matt to help him land a role at Autobiographer, and he did so well in his initial months in the company that they promoted him to CEO. Matt's a West Point grad. He's a former Army SF officer, has a master's in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness, which is a unique path that we're also going to chat a little bit about today. Before we dive in, I'd love to invite you to like, subscribe, share the podcast with a friend. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Matt, I've given a 30,000-foot overview of your background, but it's always really helpful to hear it in the first person. So can you take a few minutes to tell us about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up in the Bay Area, which is where I am now. I joined West Point out of high school and did about 10 years active duty in the Army. I was an infantry officer first and then applied to Army Special Forces, went through the pipeline, and then did 4 years as a Green Beret in 1st Special Forces Group. I was, at that sort of essential 10-year mark deciding if I wanted to stay or go. And, it was a tough decision and one that I still sort of reflect on for sure. But, realized it was time to do something else and that I wanted to settle down a bit more. And, you may have some of the same background, but when you start in the service academy and you go straight through college in the Army or the military already, get that itch kind of what's civilian life like and what's that other side. So I started to feel that more than I felt, the continued need to be in the military, and decided to get out, move back to San Francisco and start looking for jobs in tech. Eventually landed a role at Facebook and then did that for 4 years, 2 years on a governmental operations team that worked specifically with governments and NGOs around the world. I got to do a little bit of team leadership as well as carry out a role that I'd had in the military, which was military diplomacy. So that was kind of a cool bridge for me and was the validation that I think a lot of us feel of, well, how will my military skills transfer? And that was, okay, there, at least a large tech company, there are roles that are somewhat similar to what we do in the military. And then I also worked in privacy product. I did an internal transfer at Facebook and actually worked with WhatsApp for 2 years doing privacy product across their product verticals, essentially a compliance function, which was very interesting, and also was leading a small team. And I often refer to it as Facebook because that's how it was for most of the time I worked there. It turned into Meta in my last year, and I was actually on parental leave for a portion of that, which is wonderful. So welcomed my first son about 2 years ago. In that time, I realized I wanted to try out a startup environment, sort of the similarity between, large tech company and maybe a really small one is similar to the infantry down to a special operations unit. So with that analogy, which is maybe a poor one, but that's how my mind was working at the time, I decided to look for roles at startups and obviously encountered you at that point and started working with the military veterans. So of course, very thankful to you for helping me find those other co-founders and co-found Autobiographer and move forward from there. So I've been an Autobiographer just over a year now. Actually, I think I started beginning of August last year. So this is a great time to be on the podcast with you, which is pretty cool. And we've just launched the product just under 90 days ago. And so we're having that exciting, first time out in the world and seeing how the product is adopted sort of phase we're in. So it's been enjoyable.
Very cool. Congratulations on all your many successes in the uniform and since. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're working on today. So Autobiographer, tell us about the company and then your role within the company and what you guys do.
Sure. Yeah. So starting from when our relationship started as the co-founding team is sort of being assembled is each of us were coming from a space where we wanted to use AI to capture stories. Some of that is from the kind of heavier conversation that's common in the military of each of us have experienced the loss of friends during our time in service. Unfortunately for me, I experienced, excuse me, the loss of two of my closest friends in service in my transition. One, Sean, who was still serving, but succumbed to a long battle with cancer. And then a close friend, Brandon, who had just left Special Forces as well and died very suddenly from a heart attack. And so as I was sort of pondering how to infuse, the work history that I had, both military and tech at this point, with what I wanted to, the mark I wanted to leave in the world, the thought for autobiography sort of came around with this boom of LLMs that we've been in, is to think maybe we can capture people's stories and make it easy and effortless for them to do so right from their phones in a way that they can, pass that on to the next generation and leave, at least some of their essence in story format, if and when, it's their time. I also linked up with co-founders who have a similar sort of background. One of our co-founders, Luke, has a very powerful story. He lost his father when he was young to cancer, and his father, even in the 90s, was a really technologically sort of forward guy and took the time to film a lot of his thoughts and his guidance for Luke and his younger brother, Noah. And so Luke waited, I think, about 20 years and watched that video just last year as we were starting Autobiographer. So another co-founder who's showing up with this super powerful understanding of what technology can do to help assuage grief and deal with loss. And so that was kind of the impetus for the four of us coming together and really figuring out how we wanted to posture the company to attack that, really deep issue that we all face at some point. With that, there's also sort of an exciting side of it, which is each of us as co-founders are in our, I would call it kind of like mid-30s, and are spending a lot of time in introspection. Me personally, or like a lot of the people I'm sure are listening, have left a long career in the military without a whole lot of time to integrate it or figure out what it meant, because, you got to get that job, you got to move on. So I found as I started using the product initially that it is great as a tool to understand our past and to revisit events, cultivate a lot of gratitude. Specifically for me, I find I cultivate a lot of gratitude for a lot of people. And so this app kind of has this, dual customer in that it's great for somebody that's in a life transition to use it to, as like a personal therapy tool almost. And it's great to be gifted to that older generation or to people that may be in a medical need of some sort that want to get their story down on paper. So that was the impetus for the product. And then as such, the team we have is has a lot of design background and a lot of curiosity around AI. So we knew we wanted to build something that was very minimalist, very easy to just jump straight into a conversation. And then, of course, because it's powered by extremely dynamic AI, it's only one question that's a form fill question. And then as you answer, very quickly feels like you're in a conversation with a live personal biographer who's categorizing your story and preserving it. So it's been a fun process to build, and we're just getting started.
Super cool. Congrats on the recent launch as well. I mean, tell me a little bit more about the app. Specifically, I mean, I get a sense of understanding of what your guys' mission is to preserve people's stories. But what is it like to use the app? Like, what would a user expect if they were going to interact with the Autobiographer app?
Sure. We think of it in terms of that mission, which is 3 core values, which is also how we develop the app and how you can think about kind of the screens end to end. So I'll take you through an end-to-end use, which is discover, preserve, and tell. Right when you open the app, the home screen is what we call the discover screen. You can start a conversation right there with the big button that's on the bottom of the screen. The biographer will start to ask you questions based off of what it's curious about. If it doesn't know anything about you, of course, it's going to ask very basic, where you're from, things like that. If you've had conversations in the past, I've had probably almost hundreds of hours of conversations with it. It'll pull from that corpus of information to go to its next most curious place. If you want to let it do that, it'll just meander through a conversation based on its curiosity. But of course, because it's a dynamic LLM, you can say, I'm done talking about my art projects for now. I want to reflect on what it was like living in Asia or something like that, and it will react. So in this way, you can be led or lead to specific discovery as you want. And that is, ongoing. You can have a 10-minute conversation. You can have a 2-hour conversation. It's over when you're done for that time period. That moves you into the preserve screen. When you're done with the conversation, it will share all the notes that it has about that conversation. gives you the ability to correct, like, maybe you have a non-traditional like spelling of a name or something like that that it couldn't pick up. You can make those edits at that point. And when you confirm that, it goes into the biographer's, base of memory for what it knows about your story. In that preserve screen where all that is stored, you can look back on all your conversations and see down to the raw transcripts. And you can also build different specific topics along people, places, and things. It's like I have like a topic about what it was like to be in the Special Forces course or whatever. And I'll occasionally revisit that and tell a specific funny story about like when we tricked the instructor into letting us have pizza or, whatever, some silly story that as it pops up when I'm thinking about it. And every time I revisit that specific topical conversation about, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, it'll remember that story and want more of that story, or it'll say, what else can you remember about that time? Or, I don't understand this gap of time. So you have the ability to kind of storyboard your life if you want in the preservation space. And that can be really fun because I find the more you do it, the more you recall these moments from your past and then get kind of motivated to go back in and tell more, especially like, from the military, like the amount of funny stories you have of like pranks people pulled or like dumb things people did or whatever. It's like, it's kind of an endless pull. And a lot of while I'm doing this is I'll get to the studio in a second, but you start to realize these are great stories to share with people, which is why we've made them immediately shareable. But finishing up with preservation, you have that ability to kind of endlessly build new topics, and all of that is integrated in the biographer's memory underneath. So, right, like it's all contributing to a full length biography and it remembers all of this. Important time to leave a note about privacy, which is we've developed the app from the ground up to be extremely, extremely private because, when we were in the ideation phase with a whiteboard, we knew that we wanted people to share emotionally significant memories, right? Like to be completely honest, like I've talked directly about what grief feels like for me, things like that. So the things that are stored in your vault are private to you to a degree where not even we at Autobiographer have the technical ability to see them because they're encrypted to your device and your iOS keychain. That's something we developed with an advisor who we brought on early, Michael Barrett, who is the former CSO of PayPal. So we have a very serious team of advisors. We have a very serious, sort of central privacy focus. And that's one of the core attributes of Autobiographer is that obviously it's a subscription-based service. We never use this data for advertising. Frankly, we don't know, nor do we want to know what people are sharing in there because it's private. So that's the vault space and kind of your unique location to think about the aspects of your life in a totally private place. And as I have kind of felt, because this was the first time that I seriously started talking to AI and telling it very private details about my life, was at the start of this company. It does feel good to do that knowing that it's not going anywhere, right? You can really kind of workshop and pontificate and and ah and not be super polished with the way you speak. And of course, that's all staying right there. That moves me to the final screen, which is studio. As you've mentioned, the goal is to get a full-length autobiography out of this, which the studio is constantly building and tracking your progress towards. But in the short term, if you have specific topics that you want to publish, like one about my mom, like I can talk in a specific topic about my mom and then tell it just after about 20 minutes, we have enough data that it'll produce a letter for that person saying, hey, Matt's doing his biography right now. In the course of it, he talked about you. And here's the special things that he had to say about you. So it's a really great way to share immediate gratitude. You can kind of do it right from the phone into a share sheet. It's just a PDF. And then we also have a short story format. It's like if I have that super funny story about how, like, an actual one I have is where my friend Sean, who passed away from cancer, got into an argument with a Special Forces course instructor about where a land nav point should have been because it was placed improperly. And we were all watching on in horror, like thinking Sean's about to get kicked out for countermanding an instructor. And he was right. And the instructor had to eat that argument in front of all the other students and admit defeat. And Sean won the day. And it was just this really amazing situation where you found Sean was strategically very argumentative when he knew he had a point. And that's something I can immediately share from the app to Sean's kids and say, I was thinking about your dad today. This is such a funny story. And there's like a million more where that comes from. So that's sort of the whole point of the app is we want people to get to a full-length autobiography. But there's also this amazing ability to start getting that content out there immediately and sharing almost in like a social media sense, but on a very deep and kind of like connected level with the people that are important to you.
Super cool. I mean, for me personally, one of the biggest and most important things that's happened in my adult life is I lost my dad. That happened like right after I transitioned out of the Marine Corps. It was probably about 6 months after I transitioned out. It was actually less than that. And he was just a tremendous human being. And I just, I have a bunch of his stories in my head, but the fidelity of those stories is never as good as the first person.
Right.
And they're going to fade over time. And it honestly terrifies me because the relationships that we build are made up of these small stories. And as you lose those stories, it's just devastating to think that you're losing those people that are special to you again and again. So, I mean, it's amazing. I wish this product had been around when he was, so he could have shared some of these stories. And then more holistically, I was thinking about this the other day as I was prepping for this call. It's like, I know my grandparents. I got to meet 3 out of 4 of them. But I've never met anyone older from a previous generation from that. So I actually don't really know a ton about the stories of like, how did they come to this country? Like, what did they do? What were their lives like? I don't even know their names, it's like, and so something like this is just so interesting because it makes me, just so curious about what future generations will look like. I know, if everybody's story is recorded in dramatic detail, nobody's got time to sift through everybody's story, but your own family members, they would, I'm sure, be very interested to learn about it, right? I would be interested to double click on some of my family members' stories. And we have, of course, some folks' legacies via autobiographies or biographies that have been written about them ex post, but being able to record it in the first person like that is just, it's so cool. I imagine it's something that drives the team every single day.
Yes. Yeah. And there's a lot we can do with it, right? I mean, some of the stats you see, I think, is 80% of Americans at least want to eventually write an autobiography. It's just, it's a daunting task, right? Like you open a word processor and you start to realize how much you have to put down on paper. And even in the organizational piece, like, how do I start this story? Where does it come from? Going back a little bit to talking about the ephemerality of stories. Yes, definitely. Like each year, my memory fades a little bit more. However, I do notice with actually talking this out, some of it does come back and the details there. 2 things happen for me is it reminds me of how much more that I have, how many more memories are from a specific time period that I have yet to uncover, and reminds me that there are other people I want to bring forth to tell that story. So like one thing I think is interesting for AI is, there very likely will be a future version of Autobiographer that you can bring contributors forth to, share links to your story to say, hey, like, what was that same story about Sean from your perspective? So-and-so that was standing right next to me, right? Because they'll have some details you don't. It's like your story is much better when you have a bunch of folks standing around remembering it because it jogs everyone's memory and just the perspectives are much better. But also just in terms of, what you're talking about for almost like what I would call kind of the ancestry piece of it is, and my aunt is big on ancestry.com and loves snooping into family records because she's curious about those exact questions you're asking. Is like, who are these generations previous to us? Like, when did we even come to the United States? Like, where did we first land? I think my family just found out it was Montana initially, which was interesting. But this is an amazing way to fill in a part of that record that can't be like ascertained from documents, right? It's like, if we start doing this now and I can provide my autobiography to my son, then from here on forth, at least somebody can read what I did and what my life was like and what mattered to me. So it's this interesting piece of lineage that we can fill in because, I think as for most of our families, those stories right now are passed down word of mouth and probably only the best ones survive and they become like archetypal almost. There's not a lot of detail to them. So, yeah.
Will the AI be smart enough to know that I am full of BS when I say I did 100 pull-ups during the combat endurance test? or
Maybe,
my buddy tells it that it carried my pack through IOC, which we all know is not true.
That's where you need to have the contributors so your buddy can come in and check you and go, no, Brenda's telling a bunch of BS stories. But no, I mean, it is working like, as all of us, I think, in this generation basically are like sort of pocket counterterrorism experts because that's the GWAT, what we thought. So moving from seeing how terrorism takes advantage of benign systems to use them for nefarious purposes, and then looking into working at Facebook where there are a lot of bad actors, including terrorists on that platform. As I came to this, I was also kind of curious, like, can you fool AI, or like, how can I bend this for a darker purpose. Just of course doing the like what I think is very important when you build something like this is to red team it for a bit and to see how someone who has not a very good intention might use your product. And in doing that for quite a long time and still returning to it occasionally, I've consistently find that the LLM is pretty frustrating to lie to be honest, right? Like it's not as though it's necessarily understanding like your body language or your tone and not believing you, but it does have access to a great deal of human knowledge it's been trained on, and it is pretty like proficient in terms of how it listens to the story and the next questions it wants to ask. So I find it of course it won't have conversations across difficult topics. It won't act as a co-conspirator if you're trying to plan something awful, I'll say. But it also, like, the more that you try to give it a false story, the more exhausting it becomes for you, because keeping that story up and having it drill down into the details is really difficult. So I actually find as I do that, I almost always revert to just sort of telling my actual story, because
Yeah.
it's too difficult to do otherwise. But um, yeah, I think there's like the other thing is at this company in the year I've worked here, watching the LLMs improve and actually watching the kind of arms race between OpenAI and Anthropic has been interesting. So it's always getting better is kind of the answer, right? Like whatever its shortcomings are at this point will probably be less prominent in the next 6 months to a year.
This AI is going to call me out for eating wheat snack on our patrol facts, sitting in the,
Yes.
just sitting there eating my pokey bait, and all my buddies getting rained on an ambush, and I was warm and dry, and yeah, I hope it doesn't call me out like that, but
Yeah,
maybe.
it's amazing. I mean, it's like I've talked to it about Ranger School, and it like understands all the phases and like where it was like reminding me of certain aspects of how Fort Benning is laid out. It could get very interesting. Where you're like, whoa, like I actually may not be able to fool this thing based off of what it knows. So
Super cool. You touched on this just a little bit when you talked about the time that you spent at Facebook, how some of your military skills transferred over. I'd just be curious to hear a little bit about how some of your military skills you feel like have impacted your work at an early stage company.
yes, I think I was actually thinking about this the other day, just in the first year of being a startup leader, and I actually think there's something simple here, which is even from getting out of the military and learning the first elevator pitch. And for me, I think at whatever it was, like 32 years old, doing my first ever interview at a company like Facebook, which was a bit daunting, is you realize a lot of it is about how you simplify your story, but retain the power of your story to a degree that you can immediately build an emotional connection with either an interviewer or a prospective client or whoever it is. And this goes all the way up to being at a startup where you may be pitching an investor on why they should become an investor for your company. And it really is, it's somewhat cheesy because I'm the autobiographer guy telling you about the power of your story and then answering a veteran question with, well, it's all about the power of your story, essentially. But yeah, I think the key skill that I learned that helped me land the role at Facebook in what is an infantry and special operations, like company level leader capable of, that's useful at Facebook, and being able to explain that transfer of skills and do so authentically, convincingly, warmly, so that I'm conveying that I'm going to be a great member of a team and just generally somebody you want to work with, is really no different than the way you would do it in a startup where you're trying to land a specific partnership or convince a specific person to work with you. So it's really just continuing to understand what your story means to somebody outside and having a succinct way of saying, this is me, this is what I've been through and what I've learned and what I bring to the table for you. It really really has been that simple for me in each of the roles I've had since leaving.
Got it. Very cool. I want to talk a little bit about a recent success. I saw you guys announce that you've got a new brand advocate spokesperson. Can you tell us a little bit about who you guys landed and then what the process was like to get that person onto the team?
Yes, yeah. So you're talking about our editorial partner, Katie Couric, which was, a really surreal moment to land her as a partner to do this process I've just talked about, which is explaining the vision that we had for Autobiographer and generating buy-in among her for that vision and getting her to really see what we're building and herself become an advocate to the point where she, wanted to partner with us. So there's a lot of complexity in how we landed it. So I'll glaze over some of it just because it's minutia, but essentially landed with, as we were generating the idea for Autobiographer, coming up with essentially even the name of the company as a co-founding team, deciding what sort of partnerships we thought spoke to what we were trying to build. And almost as a joke, my co-founder Luke, one of the first people he came up with was Katie Couric would be awesome, just as a brainstorm, because she speaks to us as millennials because we grew up with her, right? Like Katie was reporting, I think, with Robert Gates from Mosul around the time I was in Iraq, right? It's like, remember her as a cultural icon growing up. And then obviously she speaks to a generation of baby boomers who we would like to target as customers, who are really in that legacy preservation mode and have a little bit more time on their hands to start telling their stories to the app. So it's like one of the first people brainstormed and kind of a pie in the sky idea. And here's where kind of the minutia comes in. Along the way, as we've looked at different aspects of Autobiographer and potential to publish books, we ended up working with William Morris Endeavor as a talent agency and actually have them as a literary agent for us as a company, and spoke to them about the idea, at which point they put us in touch with Katie and gave us the ability to kind of pitch to her and explain what we were doing. From there, kind of the rest is history. Katie's experienced several powerful losses due to cancer and sees the sort of the story where we come from and what we're building, and was very much on board as this is a great, interviewing tool and something that can synthesize stories that otherwise journalists are going to have no access to, right? It's like one thing Autobiographer can do is the more people that use this app and then choose to share their stories using the functionality of the app, it generates a whole new well of stories that otherwise would continue to go untold in America. So I think that was also interesting to Katie. And ultimately, to be honest, she's quite a mentor for us, right? Because we're consistently improving the functionality of the app and how it interviews and how it asks questions. And Katie's amazing at that, right? And then consistently improving the functions of how it builds and tells the arc of someone's story. And of course, Katie is amazing at that. So we love having her kind of as the product editor. And that's been an amazing relationship. Maybe if you've seen too, like on our YouTube page and some of our website, she interviewed each of us as founders. So as I still view myself kind of as that knuckle dragging military guy. And I still also feel like I'm 1 year post-military transition, even though I'm probably about 7 now, to be like feeling in that mode and then staring at Katie Couric, on like a movie set, having her ask me questions about my specific experiences was a surreal moment and something I'm super, super grateful for.
And who was a better interviewer, Katie Couric or me? No, you don't have to answer that.
You, yeah.
Right. I mean, I want to rewind the clock just a little bit. You have a really unique journey in terms of the master's program that you've chosen to pursue.
Sure.
I'd be curious to hear a little bit about it. I mean, I don't know that I've met a ton of people that have done masters that have like a similar kind of feel to the one that you've done. I'm just curious to like, how did that get on your radar? Why was it of interest? And then what are you studying?
Yeah, for sure. I'm currently in the program. I think I'm templated to be done next fall, perhaps. It's technically a Master of Philosophy and Religion, and it's called the program is Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness. It's kind of this amalgamation of different existential thought processes to create like a really unique course, and that's the reason I got there was in one part because I still have access to the GI Bill and didn't use it for an MBA, which I'm definitely not opposed to the idea of an MBA. Almost all of my friends that were in the Special Forces community as like exiting team leaders with 10 years of service, like senior captains or very junior majors. I'm probably the only one in my group of like 8 friends that didn't go to get an MBA. So I was actually quite jealous because it's an amazing way to transition. So I'm actually a huge advocate of that. But for me at the time, I was interested in jumping straight into work, which led me to Facebook, but left me with this sort of benefit that I eventually wanted to use and wasn't sure what to do with it. And so it was, just kind of hanging there. A couple years later in my transition, while experiencing the loss of those 2 close friends, Sean and Brandon, I realized that I was like under layers of grief from those rapid losses that were going to take a long time for me to integrate and understand. And so, doing the, kind of the similar story that many of us have as like, military leaders is I had never really put the proverbial rucksack down. I had never gone to therapy. I had never thought of myself as someone that should reach out and ask for help. And it became apparent to me based off just generally like my mood each day and how much grief I was in, that it was time to do that. And essentially through like a bunch of serendipitous occurrences, I found an underground psychedelic therapy guide in my hometown in the Bay Area, which to me was like a huge leap. I've at this point had no idea how these really worked other than reading a few New York Times articles that seemed to be pretty positive, but it just seemed right. I'm someone that definitely like looks before I leap. And I'm also someone that views myself as maybe needing like an aggressive form of therapy. Like I just kind of had this like intuition that talk therapy wasn't going to work for me. And so I jumped into psychedelic therapy, and then had essentially over a course of a year with three different spaced out between 2 months apart, three different psychedelic therapy sessions, had that relief and that sort of like awakening into like knowing what I wanted to do with my time, and knowing what was next for me, that you read about in some of those New York Times articles, right? People are like, oh, like a one session sort of like amazing recession of symptoms and like a return to the old person or whatever. So I felt that almost instantly in my psychedelic therapy sessions. And from that point was like an immediate believer, like, oh, this things that I read in these articles that I had been somewhat naturally skeptical of is actually true. And that has made me essentially accrued like a lifelong curiosity of, why is that? What is this? What does it do? And if it can help me, can it help others, right? In so many ways. Like I know so many people that are struggling to the degree that I was struggling, and want to help them. So I don't exactly know where that lands, but where it eventually led me to was this school that's right in the Bay Area called California Institute of Integral Studies, which is definitely like a research and advocacy leader for the legalization of psychedelics, specifically for therapeutic usage. So as I sort of researched the school and was just trying to learn more about my personal situation, it dawned on me that I could engage in a degree at this school that would help me answer some of those questions, which are like essentially synonymous with existential questions, like why does going that deeply into your mind, and thinking about your purpose and your being, why does coming out of the other end of that, solve trauma or heal for like grief and things like that, which I still don't obviously have the perfect answer. I don't think anybody does, but that's what the essence of that degree is, and kind of what I do in my free time, right? Like when I'm not working on autobiography in the evening, I'm reading my schoolwork and trying to figure out how in the future I can become part of the advocacy and part of the effort to like responsibly legalize psychedelics, especially for veterans. So that's also very interesting to me. It's like, it seems somewhat separate from autobiographer, but it ultimately isn't, because I go to work during the day and I use the product a half hour a day as I'm dog fooding it. And then I'm integrating and telling old stories and thinking of new stories. And yes, sometimes even, the app, I could say this for all the co-founders, the app has made each of us cry at different points as we stumble into a story of deep meaning. And that to me is not entirely different than the experiences one might have on psychedelics. So I'm in some strange therapeutic storytelling integration and meaning making space, both in my business and in my school life. I don't know what any of it means, Brendan, right now, but it's been a fun journey for sure.
I'm sure the story will be crystal clear with the benefit of hindsight, right? But it can feel oftentimes while we're in the journey that we're just not sure where it's going to lead us. Your story is so interesting because for a myriad of reasons. One is that you've pursued things that you're genuinely interested in, and then found ways to integrate them into your professional life. And it's funny because when we first, we were searching for a teammate for Luke, and we had interviewed a bunch of people. And when we interviewed you, it was like, sometimes you just, what I'm saying? You're like, this person's just like vibrating with a certain frequency and they're tuning fork.
Mm-hmm.
And that the people that you're going to put them in the room with, they're going to vibrate with the same frequency. And so we had that feeling just like right away. And so it is very cool to see. And it makes sense when you explain it, that this is a personal passion that has now, you've got the ability to have impact in your professional life too. It's super cool, man.
Yeah. And one thing I want to say on that really quickly is you were that for me in making that connection with these other co-founders, with Luke specifically, is I think you said something right along those lines. You're like, this is actually really interesting because what I had bifurcated, like I am this military guy with this tech experience, and then in my personal time I'm also interested in like the degree I started before I switched was an actual mental health counseling degree. I was going to be a LPCC counselor, and you actually took that and said this is actually completely useful for the role that I'm looking at to connect with Luke. And I was appreciative to you because you were the first person that was like, look at the wholeness of how this makes you a great like startup co-founder. And that was amazing. I have not landed a role either Facebook or here without the help of someone like you to help translate kind of my life experience and make that warm handshake. So for any veterans out there, that warm handshake is super, super important. I wouldn't be an autobiographer and I wouldn't be the CEO if it wasn't for you making that initial connection. So this is my thanks to you for that.
We appreciate it, and I appreciate you joining me on the podcast, and always appreciate people saying nice things. It's funny because
it's definitely true. Yeah,
people say that, they say that we tee them up with these opportunities. In reality, we always tell candidates like, you are the one that gets the role, like you are the one that gets the job. It's just like it's fun to be able to have these conversations with amazingly talented veterans all day, every day, and we're just like grateful to be able to work with this community because we love veterans, man. I mean, obviously,
for sure.
So it's super fun. And I'm glad to hear that you had a good experience with us. We try and be, helpful to every person that we meet. And, in the circumstances where it pans out and someone fits like a glove, hand in a glove, it makes it so much, much fun and so worthwhile. Okay, cool. We've talked a little bit about how you got into the seat that you're in today. I'd love to bring the show home here and ask you a little bit about how. First of all, where can people find out more about your work? Where can they support your company? Give us some of the, how do we get involved?
Sure. Yeah. So we're at autobiographer.com. You can learn everything about the company there, from the co-founding stories all the way to sort of seeing how the product itself works. And that can take you to like our YouTube page and other stuff as well, where we have some longer form videos that show us engaging with the product. You can also just download it for a trial subscription on the Apple App Store. Just search Autobiographer in the search bar. We've just launched a 14-day trial subscription. Previously was a one conversation subscription that we were kind of limited to from a technical means, but we want people to have as long as they need of an engagement with it. And we also have 2 pricing tiers, $20 a month or $199 yearly for a savings, and really the ability to create that full-length book. It's also giftable. It's an amazing gift for that older generation to kind of get them talking, get them beyond the conversations about the weather or whatever's going on in the news, and really to secure those stories from the older generation. So yeah, again, you can do all of that on www.autobiographer.com. And we're also on all the, standard social platforms and stuff. You can reach out to us anywhere, ask questions anytime. We love user feedback. We love ideas about the product. And we love, because it's encrypted, and of course, we don't know the stories people are telling. That's all up to people. But as soon as people are ready to tell us what they've created with it and want to share that, we not only love to hear that from our perspective, just because we're huge fans, but also as we have Katie as an editorial partner, right? We have a couple of avenues to which we can highlight people's stories too. So excited to do all of that. And for anyone listening, please just reach out to me if you have questions, because I'll talk about this stuff all day and nerd out on AI and the future of what this could do.
I want to ask one final question, Matt. I want to ask, with the benefit of a few years out of the uniform, what advice would you have for transitioning vets who are coming out of the service right now?
Oh man, it's a great question. I think it actually goes back to probably 2 of the things we've already spoken about, which is as you're transitioning, do some work on figuring out what you want to share about your story, what's unique about it, not only in the obvious sort of elevator pitch, like, transition of business sense, like me as a military advisor turns into a customer success agent or whatever that is, like learn some of that verbiage, obviously, but also in a deeper sense, again, is like, you're eventually going to want to connect with people on teams that you want to be on just as much as they want you on. So finding a way to sort of convey your essence, your specific brand of humor, like the facets of your personality, and also to gauge obviously the interviewer or the partner that you're looking at, because it's a two-way fit, obviously. So I think beginning to hone that is a process that it's really important to gain some aptitude for it in the beginning, but it's also important to continue to hone in perpetuity because it never ends. I'm now at a startup again, like pitching investors and essentially, using that skill that I learned on the first day I left the military, and continually tweaking it from there. So that's one piece. And then I think it's talking about exactly what you did for me, Brendan, which is like sort of showing the whole picture of a person, and even parts that don't seem necessarily that interesting, like Matt's specific interest in weird esoteric philosophy, and why would that matter for a startup, right? Is like, be proactive with yourselves as veterans and realizing that the whole picture that you have is important, and probably the more meaning you can make of it, and the more you can determine what all of your likes, doesn't matter if it's like a personal hobby or a book that you like, how that feeds towards the role that you want to have, and trying to get like job satisfaction alignment. Like, never give up on that journey, and don't slot in to be like, I worked on this piece of technical equipment in the military, so like I'm just going to do that on the outside. That's well and great if that's what you want to do. There's obviously nothing wrong with that, but don't discount the whole aspect of who you are, and continually challenge yourself to bring all of that to the role that you think is right for you, I guess.
That's awesome. Storytelling really is at the core of so much in business, whether it's fundraising, whether it's hiring, whether it's promoting, a product, whether basically, if it's getting a job. I mean, it's like basically the critical skill. And so you've clearly done a fantastic job of telling your own story, clearly did a fantastic job during those interview processes to join this team. But also now you're helping other people do that. And it's awesome to see it come full circle. So congratulations, Matt. I'm wishing you guys the best of luck, and all the success that you guys deserve with this really important project.
Thanks. Yeah. And thank you again. Thanks for everything. I'm sure your interview prep helped that story be honed in a way that was right for it. But yeah, I'm really indebted to the military veteran for what y'all do. And in general, love the work that you do, because the transition process is hard, and there's so many unknowns and so much stuff to figure out. So I always recommend that people connect with an organization like yours and somebody with your level of expertise, because it makes all the difference in the world. So thank you.
Thanks, man. Before this turns into a meeting of the Mutual Admiration Society, I think we're going to call it here. Matt, thanks for joining us today. If you're listening to the podcast, just a quick reminder, feel free to like, subscribe, leave us a review, share it with a friend. Go to autobiographer.com to check out their product. We have a bunch of in-person events coming up. We've got a bunch of them scheduled in Texas in the coming months. We're going to have some more on the East Coast as well. Our job board is completely full. We're onboarding new clients every week. So if you're on the market for a new role, go to themilvat.org/careers. If you're looking to meet us in person, come to themilvat.org/events. Sign up for the newsletter. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys back here next week.